What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review episode 5 of The Last of Us, an episode called Endure and Survive, which was written by Craig Mazin and directed by Jeremy Webb. The episode dropped 2 days early due to the Super Bowl, so if you have not yet seen the episode, go do so because all spoilers from this episode will be fair game. But we are now officially a little bit past the halfway mark, and that there are only 4 episodes left. And I'm rapidly running out of adjectives with which to praise the show, so I'll just keep saying it. The show is sad, it's haunting, at times terrifying, and on a very rare occasion, poetic and beautiful. And like any show, I've got my own little nitpicky grievances, but they are not that numerous. On the whole, I fucking love the show, and I just hope that it will inspire many other storytellers out there, whether they work in television or film or whatever, to try and adapt other games with as much attention and detail and love and with as much integrity as this show, because there are plenty of differences between the show and the game. Case in point would be the character of Sam. I mean, in this show, he's much younger, he's deaf, and the way he meets his end is a little different from the game. So the show is not afraid to kind of zig and zag, but the spirit, the tone, the style absolutely feels completely, totally faithful to the world that Neil Druckmann created. And I'm looking forward to future episodes where Neil Druckmann will be back on the payroll. I'm looking ahead on Wikipedia. Neil Druckmann is the writer on episode 7, and he's the co-writer with Craig Mazin on episode 9, so bring on some Neil Druckmann. Also, if you missed it, I posted a video a couple days ago with my top 10 recommendations for games that I would like to see adapted into shows and movies, provided that they're done so with the same love as this show, because as we all know, most video game adaptations are horrendous and unwatchable. And what it proves to me is that you don't need to dumb something down to make it more accessible. There's like this weird conventional wisdom in Hollywood where they'll find a great novel or a great comic or a great game and say, oh, well, that's great in that format, but we have to find a way to simplify it and broaden its appeal to bring in the widest possible audience. I say, fuck all that. If you make a show or a movie with as much purity as the source material, and just trust the fact that at a minimum, the people who loved it the first time around might come around to see what it's all about. And so that's yet another aspect of the show that I really like, is how it is disproving a lot of that conventional Hollywood filmmaking that has ruined so many other adaptations in the past. And they're getting rewarded for it. HBO posted an article the other day that the audience per episode on the night that they premiere has grown a full 60% since the original Sunday night premiere of episode 1. And that's incredible. It just shows how word of mouth is positive. There are plenty of people out there who dislike the show, but clearly there are enough who love it, where they're telling their friends, they're telling their family members, they're telling people at work, hey, you got to check out the show The Last of Us. It fucking rules. But let's dive into the details of this episode, where we finally got to see a bloater in action, and I've been eagerly awaiting the arrival of the bloater, and it did not disappoint. It was basically like an infected version of the Incredible Hulk, just smashing people and ripping their heads off. And there was no exposition about the bloater, like in the game. And admittedly, I had never played the game. I've only watched the cinematics. But in the game, when the first one shows up, you get a little exposition about what they're all about. But for people who don't know, a bloater is an infected who has reached stage 4. That's the stage beyond clicker. Sometimes when they get older, they just kind of shrivel up and waste away and just kind of get stuck against a wall. But sometimes they just get stronger and stronger. And when they reach bloater stage, they're not as good with like the echolocation, but they make up for it with just sheer aggression and strength. And the fungus, as it continues to grow and cover their bodies, basically turns into armor. In the game, if you want to kill one, you have to basically whip out a flamethrower and get rid of the exterior surface to get down to all the meaty bits underneath, so you can finally bring that fucker down. So it was just killer seeing that fucker in action, and I think we'll see a few more before the end of the season because, well, anyway, that's a spoiler from the game, and I will not get into that now. But let's dive into the official beginning of the episode, where we get a little bit of a time jump to about 10 days earlier, where we see the consequences after Fedra goes down in flames in Kansas City. FEDRA stands for Federal Disaster Response Agency. They're basically the last remnants of the pre-outbreak government. And as we learn over the course of the episode, they basically relied upon torture and murder for 20 years to maintain order. And while there were some useful benefits to their heavy hand, like shoving all the infected or luring all the infected into the tunnels beneath the city, but obviously, at best, that was like putting your finger in a dike, which when that dike finally erupted at the end of the episode, that was, no bueno. They just basically put a Band-Aid on a problem and it continued to fester and get worse. And that's what's so cool about the bloaters is that they're not just going to waste away and die. They get stronger and more dangerous. Like if you look at a movie like 28 Days Later, great zombie flick or quote-unquote zombie flick directed by Danny Boyle, where those infected with the rage virus, they're really fast, they're really scary, they're really dangerous, but over time, they just waste away and die. Like they're not going to know how to feed themselves or build civilizations. Eventually, the infection will run its course. But with this fungus outbreak, it just gets worse over time. Like they stick around for fucking years. So that just makes the whole fictional setting all the more terrifying. But what's truly terrifying about this episode is seeing the horrors inflicted upon Fedra by the people who used to be oppressed. And as somebody points out over the course of the episode, if you're abused for years, when you finally get your freedom, you're probably going to inflict the exact same abuses upon those who were afflicting you. And we see at one point like a body being dragged down the street behind a truck, and it's like a porcupine, all the knives stuck in the body. It is dark. And they're announcing on the radio about how they're going to have fair trials. And it just shows how even with people who are morally justified and in the right, just how quickly they can become monsters themselves and how they're, basically threatening murder and execution with those who were informers against their neighbors in the past. And after they give up all the information about Henry and where he might be, Kathleen puts him to death anyway and just says to burn the bodies. And I think a key ingredient in the secret sauce for this show is that no matter which characters we're talking about or what motivates them or what drives them or what horrors they have committed in the past, it finds a way to portray them, maybe not in a sympathetic light, but at a minimum you can understand their reasoning. You can see where they're coming from. Like the character of Henry, he's a very sympathetic character. He's instantly likable. We're rooting for him. He's looking after his little brother who is basically defenseless without him. But as we learn, he gave up Kathleen's brother, betrayed him for some medicine that his little brother needed. And so does that make Henry a monster? Who knows? Or Kathleen, she feels justified. Her brother was murdered, so she feels justified in all of her actions. And I feel like for this particular cultural moment that we're living in, where on social media, people can be very black and white and binary about the way they describe people if they disagree with them. And I just find it so refreshing that you have a show with many moral gray areas, a show that's willing to acknowledge that you can't really understand anyone until you've walked a few miles in their shoes. And I guess in this era of perpetual moral outrage, I wonder if this show is frustrating to some people because it doesn't give them any easy answers about who are the good guys. I mean, as we saw in the teaser for the next episode, Tommy is not a big fan of his big bro for all the things that they did, which Joel did in the name of looking after his brother. And so everybody feels like they're in the right, but in the end, like the episode is called, you just got to endure and survive. And morality and ethics and all these other concerns are concerns from a bygone era, the era of civilization, which has been over for 20 fucking years. On the other hand, in spite of all these horrors that people are capable of inflicting on each other, there are always still moments of light, just like seeing the innocent friendship emerging between Ellie and Sam, or one of the most beautiful moments this episode when a sniper is opening fire at the four of them, and Joel turns to Ellie and says, "Look, it's dark and he's got shit aim. Do you trust me?" And you see Ellie kind of ponders it for a second and then nods, and she does. So yeah, it's taken a couple episodes, but that rapport, if you want to call it a surrogate father-daughter relationship or friendship or whatever word you want to use for describing the bond, trust and loyalty and protecting your loved ones still exist even in this absolutely savage story. In any event, one of the interesting parts of this little flashback is when we see from Henry's perspective, he watches the ambush unfold where Joel's just taking guys out. So he puts together this plan where he wants to find them, recruit them, and he wants to escape Kansas City through all these tunnels that are underneath the city. And as Edelstein refers to at the beginning of the episode, you might as well kill yourself. That is suicide, because once again, 15 years ago, they were all kind of ushered down there. But what Henry says is that 3 years ago, that Fedra secretly started cleaning them out and killing them. There might be a few still left down there, but I guess we can presume that Fedra would have kept that kind of that extermination a secret, because they wanted that threat to remain in the back of the minds of the people so they could keep them under control. And what was cool is how when they got down there, we saw remnants of basically like a little shelter, and it was bittersweet. It was kind of sad, where we see all these murals and childlike drawings, but it basically looked like almost like a childlike nursery where there are all these rules on the wall about making sure you always lock doors behind you, make sure that you get the password from people that you don't know, don't play loudly, etc. But then Joel very cynically points out that obviously somebody didn't follow the rules and they got wiped out. So speaking of Joel, one of the funniest bits all episode is when Sam and Henry first approach them at gunpoint, and Joel's being a little hardcore and a little intense, and Ellie had just this absolutely fantastic line where she says, "That's just the way he sounds. He has an asshole voice." Like, I have to admit that Bella Ramsey is growing on me. I was a little harsh on her initially in my first few video reviews, because I felt like there were so many scenes where she just wasn't quite... Either she wasn't quite getting it, or it took me a while to warm up to her, just see what angle she's coming from. But by episode 5, there wasn't a single beat or moment the entire episode that like rang hollow or felt inauthentic. I'm totally down with Bella Ramsey now. But getting back to the bunker, there's a sweet moment where Sam and Ellie are comparing their comic book collections. I mean, it's kind of sad and pitiful, but I think both of them had 4 different issues, but they were able to kind of fill in some gaps in the story, and they're comparing their collections. But it made me sentimental for my own childhood. And when they started doing that little impromptu soccer game, it started filling me with dread, because even though Henry is convinced that those tunnels are empty, all those sounds, anyway, they gave me the heebie-jeebies anytime I hear something loud. But when they emerge from the tunnels and they enter this residential neighborhood, then things start to heat up really quickly. There's a sniper opening fire at them from a house. They take cover. Joel works his way around, works his way up the back. There's an old guy up there with a sniper rifle, and Joel just says, "Look, slide over the rifle, chill for an hour, but don't make me do this." The guy goes for it. Joel takes him out. But I guess it's good that he did, because Joel uses that sniper rifle quite a bit over the next 5 or 10 minutes. He hears over the old guy's radio that there are reinforcements that are incoming rapidly, and there's a really badass moment as Ellie's running away from this truck that's basically got like a bulldozer plow in the front of it, but she's running and firing over her shoulder, and just a cool little action beat. I mean, part of making a cool show or great genre entertainment, your characters have to look like badasses when they do really cool things, but it's Joel who really shows off just what a marksman he is throughout this sequence. He takes out the driver, the truck swerves to the side, it blows up, and then we get this really tense negotiation between Kathleen and all of her people, and they're trying to get Henry to come out when the truck starts to sink down to the ground. And I'm not quite sure how that would make sense in terms of the blueprint of like where the tunnels are beneath the city and where the various runners and stalkers and clickers and whatnot, where they were kind of how they were corralled. But when they start to pour out, they start pouring out in droves, and the droves it doesn't stop, it doesn't let up. It's just dozens and then hundreds, and they just pour out like a flood. And the scene did not disappoint. As I mentioned earlier, Perry gets his fucking head torn off by a goddamn bloater. The eeriest moment is when Ellie's hiding in a car, and we see this little baby clicker, a little girl clicker, crawling through the window and almost kind of doing a front handspring in the back seat. It's like, God damn, she's a very agile, dexterous little clicker, but she just looked absolutely terrifying. And we see her again when she takes out Kathleen. And yeah, Kathleen, I wonder how people are going to feel about Kathleen, because they did try to humanize her with that scene in her childhood bedroom and talking about how her brother would have wanted her to forgive Henry. But I have a feeling most people are going to look at her as just like a I don't know, like a monster on a killing going through a killing frenzy. I found her to be the least sympathetic character so far, but I think the show at least tried to portray her in a vaguely sympathetic light. But I did take a little bit of satisfaction where even amidst this battle, she's holding up her heroes at gunpoint, and that little girl takes her out. I was like, that's what you get. And then it appeared as if the episode was going to calm things down and give us some hope and optimism. For people who were not familiar with the game, I'm sure they were thrilled to hear Joel ask Henry to join them on their big trek to Wyoming. He's like, look, I don't know how we're getting there. We're probably walking, but you're welcome to join us. And it was a very sweet, heartfelt moment. But then we see inside the kids' room, like Ellie and Sam are having this little bonding scene, but he asks her if it's still you inside you, if you turn into a monster, and he reveals the bite on his ankle, which is a deviation from the game. In the game, they're hanging out and they're talking, she leaves, and then we see him kind of examining his ankle. The next morning she comes in and he attacks her. In this, she basically says, like, my blood is magic, cuts her hand open and rubs her blood in the wound. We see it doesn't quite work that way because the next morning, a really eerie, terrifying image. I mean, she's asleep, kind of conked out in her chair, and she looks over, and he's sitting bolt upright on his bed. And I guess because she wasn't moving, he didn't feel like attacking her yet. But the moment she moves and starts talking to him, he makes his move, and Henry freaks out. Just like in the game, initially Henry's got his gun on Joel, trying to keep him from doing anything, but then Henry takes out his bro, can't handle it, and blows his own goddamn brains out. I mean, that's as grim and depressing and sad and bleak of an ending as you can imagine. And as that scene unfolded, I realized, wow, like every great character that gets introduced in the show, they don't make it. We lost Tess, we lost Bill, we lost Frank, we lost Henry, we lost Sam. And it just reminds me of that old line, how like the prettiest music is always sad. And I think that's part of what gives this story such resonance and such emotional power. It's not giving us the typical bullshit TV endings. I remember when, or like TV formulas or conclusions. I remember when season 2 of The Witcher came out, and I was just irate that they'd chosen to make so many, like basically made such a departure from the source material, from the book. And they introduced all these terrible new subplots with Yennefer, and people are saying, oh, well, you got to do that because it's TV. Like, you can't just have like one of your main characters like only show up in the last quarter of the story. I'm like, well, yes, you can if it's a better story, if it's a good story. And I'm sure conventional TV thinking would be, oh, well, you got to let Tess survive so she can come back. Or you got to let Bill, Frank, and Henry, Sam survive so they can come back. Like, no, the show is special because it makes those hard creative choices. And the episode ends in a satisfying but somber way. They have their funeral, and Ellie leaves a note behind saying she's sorry. And she's like, which way is west? And she starts walking off. I mean, she is determined to follow through. And it was so cool seeing Joel basically like strap on his sniper rifle. He just looks so much like his character from the game in terms of having that backpack where he had all of his bandages and weapons and guns. Like throughout the course of the game, Joel is basically equipped to take out a small fucking army. And anyway, it's just yet another example of what a great job this show is doing. But I can't wait to see what happens next. But before I wrap things up, I have to bring you some news from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel, because Manscaped, they now sell beard products. That's right. They're once again revolutionizing men's grooming with the brand new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. From a beard trim to a fresh shave, the technology behind the Beard Hedger Pro Kit allows you to shape your signature beard look. Now you can finally use Manscaped products to make your drapes match your carpet by going to manscaped.com and using the discount code WRONGREEL in all caps for 20% off and free shipping. And it's funny, as I read that copy, I was listening to another podcast or YouTube channel recently when they suddenly went into the copy for Manscaped. And I was like, wait a second, that's my copy. I was like, oh yeah, everybody gets the same marching orders or the same notes. But join the 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and check out the Performance Package 4.0. Also, remember to apply the Crop Preserver and Crop Reviver before showing off your new bod to anybody that is lucky enough to see your freshly shorn new physique. And to complete the set, Manscaped includes their Shed Travel Bag and Anti-Chafing Boxer Briefs. That's my favorite product of theirs, as free gifts to keep all your goodies stored comfortably. So if you like this YouTube channel or you like my podcast, please consider making a purchase to support my commentary endeavors. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. But let me know what you think in the comments below. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.